Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. Before interconnection and the mass marketing of music, you had regional music. Music that was created in the real time, with definitive characteristics of certain parts of the country and its rhythms. Some had urban feel, like the Chicago Shuffle, and the beat of Dixieland, or the fact that a tuba played the bass line. My guest today is responsible for creating a piece of regional American music. One of the slow-cooked South, with a B3 jamming in a crowded bar with Levon Helm and Mac Rebenak, Howard Johnson, Stephen Stills, Willie Nelson, and Bill Withers. Back to records, my guest made with the iconic rhythm section of Steve Cropper, Donald Duck Dunn, and Al Jackson Jr., a gymnasium of finger pop and soul jazz that has mesmerized audiences for years. My guest marinated with the likes of Al Green, Otis Redding, and James Brown, all passing through and playing with the baddest cats in town in the black neighborhoods back when venues were accessible. The love and what you choose to do with that love are a testament to the music and the musician. But my guest can't solve everybody's problems. He's busy cutting LA jazz song, or playing flute with Rita Coolidge, or showing up to gig at the Musical Instrument Museum in Phoenix on October 3rd. Booker T. Jones, it's an honor to have you on the Jake Feinberg Show.
Oh, thank you, Jake.
It's nice to talk to you, man. I wanted to ask you first off. My wife oftentimes doesn't really understand what I'm doing, but when I told her who I was interviewing today, I said Booker was the leader of his high school band when he was in high school. You were the band director, is that correct?
I was the head of a combo that played for high school sock hops and talent shows at lunchtime in the auditorium. We had a big auditorium in our high school right in the middle of the school, and I would play saxophone and lead a combo for that and other events at the school, talent shows and so forth.
Looking back on it, you were in the same class as David Porter as well, and several other cats. I guess here's my question. Could you talk a little bit about your folks and where they came from, where their families immigrated from? Because it was what I love the regional music scenes, and you were so part of it. But your folks they came from somewhere. Talk about their journey, please.
My mother and father both were born in Holly Springs, Mississippi, 50 miles south of Memphis. They were born and raised in churches there in Holly Springs. They met and married in Memphis. They met at a church not maybe 3-4 blocks from Beale Street. So my mother played classical music, gospel music. She was taught by her mother, who was a piano teacher, and she sang in church and played the Negro spirituals and everything from that to Debussy and Liszt on the piano when I was a little boy. My father also sang. He was a math teacher by trade, and he was the one that took me down to Beale Street. My mother worked at an insurance company there, and that's where I heard the blues as a little boy. Now, as far as the classmates, you mentioned David Porter and Maurice White. They were a grade ahead of me. They were in 12th grade when I was in 11th grade at Booker Washington High School. But we were still in the same groups together. Maurice was the drummer in the combo, and he and David were in a doo-wop group, we call them, together. They sang for the sock hops and so forth. Right. And those were my buddies. Yeah.
It's so beautiful. I mean, it's somewhat effortless. I mean, reading your bio, many people are very smart. Many people have high IQs, but, you have to apply yourself. And, I'm thinking your dad is a math teacher. What I didn't realize as a non-musician, mathematics is a huge part of music. And
Exactly.
and I was hoping you could talk about that part of it, because I think oftentimes people look at music and they say, oh, it's just art. But actually, no, there's a lot of science and there's a lot of math. And I think now it makes sense. Your dad was a math teacher. So talk about those foundations, the mathematics that go into playing rhythms, chords, changes, all that stuff.
Well, Jake, I feel that you have a very valid point there. If you look at what math is, it's numbers. And if you look at the numbers that we live by, take the number 12, for instance, a very, very significant number. The Egyptians decided that there would be 12 months in a year. There are 12 colors in the spectrum. There are 12 notes in the scale, and so forth and so on. And so those relationships become very important to a child who's developing emotionally and listening to music. And so the music can convey much more than what is really at the surface, thanks to the mathematics of it.
And your father was your. I have a question for you, actually. Can you talk a little bit about like in D.C., Washington, or any of these urban centers? There were these great venues within the black neighborhoods, and I'm curious as to, a lot of times guys that were local would be the rhythm sections for some of the heavier cats that were coming through town. And I'm thinking to myself last night as I'm doing this write-up, I'm like, I wonder. I mean, obviously everybody knows you were the for Stax, but when you were really young, was there a venue in your neighborhood that the community could go to and kind of, as Art Blakey would say, wash away the dust of everyday life by being able to see these guys? And did you play with these guys?
Yes, there was Beale Street, and Beale Street was where you could go and get the big bands coming through town. There were big jazz bands coming through, important bands, everyone from Duke Ellington to Joe Tex. And I did get to play with a few of them. I got to play trombone with Joe Tex on one of his recording sessions. I made a name for myself as a pretty curious, versatile musician as a young boy, because I experimented from age 10 with everything from oboe. I learned how to play oboe and clarinet and baritone sax, and also the keyboards. So people would tell other people that I could play these different instruments. So I would sit in down there on Beale Street on bass. I played Willie Mitchell's band. I played bass with him. I played baritone sax with Willie Mitchell and Bo Legs Miller, and I got my first job at a studio on baritone sax. So there was really a melting pot there in Memphis with the big bands coming through and the musicians all getting mixed up and playing with one another and mixing in with the professionals that were coming through.
Now, it's so well said. We're here with Booker T. Jones, and Booker, talk a little bit about has your mindset changed at all? I mean, the band. I mean, the amount of your legacy is so. I mean, there's just so much there, and I try to say to myself, what is left to paint on the palette? I mean, you have many children. You have, you have such a legacy. You've collaborated with all these spirits. Some still visiting this planet, some gone. And so now, when you go to places like the Musical Instrument Museum, are there expectations are the wrong word? What are some of the musical priorities that you feel are still important that you have to continue to push forward?
Well, Jake, to address the first part of your question, my mindset has changed quite a bit. I had dinner with a friend of mine that was a high school, or rather a college buddy, a saxophone player that I knew 52 years ago. We had dinner last night, and we were talking about how we grew up musically. You know, when I first came into the world, in musical jargon, I said to him, you know, I was a B-flat person. I thought the world was made in B-flat because I was playing clarinet. Then I found out with oboe, that's not all there is to it. The world is C. The oboe is made in C. And then when I discovered the alto sax and the baritone sax, oh my goodness, E-flat. So you start to think, you know, your mind changes. It's a shift. So he, like myself, we're continually trying to improve ourselves and our relationship to music and the way we think about it, and getting comfortable with it. So that is something that's kind of an ongoing process for me. As far as going to places like the museum, this particular one, I'm looking forward to. It's new. I haven't been there before, and the curator is a friend of mine, Lowell Pickett from Minneapolis, and so that experience is always pretty much educational to me, because these instruments are the result of the imagination of various musicians around the world. So it's very interesting and very educational for me to see the instruments that have been created.
And every culture, I've been there. There's a little display. Whether it's it could be all the African countries or the Asian countries, and it is. I guess the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was, would you consider guys like Don Patterson and Sonny Stitt and Jack McDuff, were they musical? Were they first generation? Were they older than you, like McDuff and those guys? Like when you,
yeah,
I'm talking about the first time. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you mentioned a major influence. I think I snuck in the club when I was 13 or 14 down on Fourth and Beale in Memphis, and heard Jack McDuff with two other people, with a sax player and with Joe Dukes on drums. And so he was doing the bass with his fingers or with his feet, however he wanted to. Jack McDuff, for the listeners, was a famous Hammond B3 organ player that came through on that circuit that we were talking about earlier in Memphis. And I heard him play right up close, and so that was inspirational to me to hear his drive. I was more inspired by what he did with, as you say, his spirit and his force than what he did with the music. He was just so it had so much intent, and you could feel it. And, you could feel it in the house how intent he was on making the music have a certain purpose. And that's just something you cannot undo or forget when you meet somebody like that. Well, I didn't meet him, but I heard him. So, yeah, and I'm losing track on what your original question
No,
was.
it's all right. No, you are painting it, because that's what I'm talking about, is that better than anybody else, is that music and magic are only separated by two letters. And that music, the healing quality of music, I think it especially when you were growing up, represented, it was being made at the moment. It wasn't manufactured at all. It was right in the moment, and you could see this visceral energy. These guys were playing their lives. McDuff was, and you were too. And that's the thing. I find it hard today to relate to people that might be playing the blues, because it's hard to play the blues when you grow up in suburbia. It's a lot easier to play the blues when you're living the blues. And for the audience, I find it imperative for, I got touched a little bit. I was born in the late 70s. I sort of felt that magic, or what the ideas of what music is really meant to be about. But I just would love you to talk about the love, Booker T, and how music and love co-join, and how important that is to real creative spontaneity in music.
Well, Jake, I feel that's a really deep statement, and I'm glad that you're addressing that at this point. We can go back to the numbers we were talking about. The blues, of course, is a 12-bar medium, and it's music that when I was born into the world was a social medium. It was an expression. It was a release. Very very similar to religious music, social music, and used for so many purposes. And but to connect it to that word that you just mentioned, love, is such a, you're getting into divine territory there. And it's of course the creative muse expressing itself and giving people purpose here on earth. Me being one of them, I feel like it's my purpose to continue to do that, to make music for my own self and for other people. And it's done with it's done with care, and it's done with purpose. It's done with intent, and that's where the love comes in, and that's where the transfer between one person to another comes in. So I think that's why people like to go to live concerts, because they can, they can hear the records and they can get it from the records. So I think there's more love being transmitted and transferred through music and through the arts in general in person.
Yeah. You mentioned venues, and one of the themes of my show is also these ideas that you could wind up playing. A lot of times you'd play strip joints or bars, smoky bars, and Cannonball Adderley was going in Arizona, was coming in, and he was playing behind the bar, and he was looking around, and everybody was packing heat. I mean, it was just it was it was like the idea that this was a social music, and that overlap and differentiation was good. That was a good thing. Not a linear. The linear stuff doesn't really work, and the barriers. I don't need to tell you about this, but the idea that for a while, especially when Macklemore Avenue was coming out and Booker T, you were just settling in. Really, the record companies they left you alone, because all they knew was that you were selling records to young kids. So you had a full impact on the younger generations, and they didn't care what you were doing as long as you were making them money. And that changed a lot. But that magical time when you were first creating, and, just the MGs were, they were the loyalty of bands. You can go back to New York and look at McCoy's band and Gary Bartz's band. And as far as I'm concerned, the MGs, Booker T and the MGs was right there. It was loyalty. It was about making music that felt good. And I don't want to I could spend 4 hours talking about it, but I'd love you to just talk about, in your mind, what was special about Booker T and the MGs from a love point of view.
Yeah. Well, your last statement was one that I'm glad you made, and we're doing an interview, so I will take the opportunity you asked for me to comment from my point of view. And speaking about the record companies right now,
go ahead.
In a number of these cases, to be honest with you, Jake, these were trials for me. Many times the record companies didn't see commercial possibilities in some of these projects that I wanted to do. The Macklemore Avenue was a tribute from me to the Beatles, because I felt they had reached an apex. They had made music that was just unbelievably brilliant, and they had no reason to do that. They could have retired, and they were the top group in the world. So that was a battle to get that recorded. For instance, Willie Nelson's Stardust album, that was a battle for me and Willie to get that album. I think we only pressed up 500 copies to begin with, and that music had to prove itself. So that's just because this is an interview, and I'm just clarifying that it's not always easy to get new projects out.
I think it maybe more to the point, it's hard to get projects out where you feel like your real artistic expression was in the record.
Exactly.
And I know. I just think that there was, I know you know better than me, okay? But I know when I look back at the RCO All-Stars and I see that group going up to Big Pink or Lee Vaughn's house and to see those maniacs, just beautiful people going up and playing American roots music. It was, you guys were trying to, as much as possible, get away from the stranglehold and just be able to be yourselves. And I think that's the hardest thing now in music, is because the record companies really are they're the opponent, and they're not going to really. So I mean, it's but staying in the positive. When was the time in your musical career when you felt that you were able to be yourself the most? Was it right at the beginning? I'm curious about that.
Well, that's a good question, but I do want to back you up some, because you were speaking about beautiful spirits and beautiful souls, and I have to go back to Levon Helm and the RCO All-Stars project was a tour de force of Levon Helm all alone by himself. That was his vision. And I tell you, Jake, we lost that guy, but when you're on stage with Levon Helm and he looks over at you and smiles, there is no feeling like that in the world. You feel like you are okay. He has so much spirit and so much beauty. And that's I just have to say that about him because he's not around anymore. But and he was one of those beautiful spirits that you were talking about. And now I've forgotten what the question was.
It's fine. One reason well, here's the point is that I'm searching for. You don't have to look any farther than the TV to see how the lack of leadership that's going on in our country at this point. There's just a vacuum, and but I look back at so I have to look for new leadership, and I look to guys like yourself who have been doing it. And you talk about Levon smiling, but I guarantee if Booker T's smiling at me, I'm feeling the same way, man.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. That's a great feeling. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I wish I could play an instrument with you, but the truth is that, that group, that RCO group, Lou Marini, Tom Bones Malone, Howard Johnson, you guys talk a little bit about. I think one of the things about your generation that's fascinating is that you guys had a very large musical vocabulary. It could be honky tonk, it could be boogie woogie, it could be blues, but labels didn't matter. You guys just had enough of a vocabulary to go in and swing really hard. And I want to know
those. Oh, I was going to say those were all great guys who were great players. Lou Marini and Tom Malone and the tuba player Howard.
Marquez shooting 2 Placer County Sheriff's deputies a short time later, one of them dying from his wounds. Marquez taken into custody in Placer County Friday afternoon.
4 students still in the hospital after that deadly school shooting in the Seattle area. Doctors at Harborview Medical Center in Seattle say the 2 boys in intensive care. Grief counselors are on hand. This is news on the Blaze Radio Network.
Everyone is making the switch to the Blaze to make it their source for the truth. Why not make it your source for the truth? Make theblaze.com your homepage for news that the other outlets won't even touch. Subscribe to The Blaze TV at theblaze.com/TV or on Dish Network and get access to original programming like For the Record, the show that exposes what's really going on that the government doesn't want you to know. And Real News, the daily conversation on the topics of the day that matter most. Check out the Blaze Radio Network at theblaze.com/radio with original shows like Buck Sexton, The Morning Blaze with Doc Thompson, Pat and Stu, and Jay Severin. Or if you need something to hold in your hands, subscribe to the Blaze magazine. So basically, anywhere you need to go, you can take the truth with you by taking the Blaze with you. This is the Blaze. Truth lives here. So just to recap, anywhere you need to go, you can take the truth with you by taking the Blaze with you. Find out all the ways at theblaze.com.
We're learning more from social media about that suspected shooter at a school north of Seattle, killing 1 classmate, leaving 4 others injured. The Blaze Radio's Chris Vermillions with more.
A series of tweets from Jalen Freiberg throughout the days leading up to the shooting reveal relationship troubles and anger at a person he describes as no longer my brother. Freiberg saying in the same tweet, "Dude, she tells me everything." I'm Chris Vermillion, The Blaze News.
To the latest now on Ebola, there continue to be more and more cases worldwide. The World Health Organization saying the number of confirmed cases of the disease now over 10,000, with just over 4,900 deaths. The president, in his weekly radio address, he talks about the most recent diagnosis in New York City, saying New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio would have all the support needed from the federal government. The chief of the New York Police Department calling an attack on a group of police officers an act of terrorism. We get details from the Blaze Radio's Greg Moore.
We would describe him as a self-radicalized. We would describe him as inspired. We would feel at this time that he was self-directed.
New York City Police Commissioner Bill Bratton calling the hatchet attack on a pair of police officers in Queens an act of terrorism. Rookie officer Kenneth Healy is fighting for his life after being struck in the head. Another officer wounded in the arm. The assailant, Zale Thompson, being shot by other officers on the scene. Thompson being described as a radicalized Muslim whose Facebook page is filled with anti-American rhetoric. Thompson attacking 4 officers as they posed for a photograph.
There are more airstrikes happening against ISIS terrorists in Iraq. The U.S. Central Command saying warplanes carrying out 22 strikes on targets since yesterday. They've been near a key dam in Mosul and other locations, including an oil refinery held by terrorists in northern Iraq. I'm John DeMaster with news on the Blaze Radio Network. Truth lives here.
Inside the Parisi Palace at 2919 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. And thank you so much for making us part of your day today. And on the heels of a cosmic interview this week on Wednesday with Dr. Bill Cosby, follow up today with another legend in music, Booker T. Jones, who's going to be performing at a music festival up in Scottsdale today with Mindy A Bear. Booker T. Jones, known better as Booker T and the MGs. This is our second interview, and pretty poignant. We talked a lot in the first about love and leadership, and we continued on in that discussion last week in a pre-recorded interview. So settle in, take a listen, and we'll come back with Dawn Renee as well, a Raku ceramic artist. Hang in there on the Jake Feinberg Show, Power Talk 1210, Booker T. Jones, now. Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. In a day and age when younger cats, including myself, feel a need to change the subject, it has created a musical feel of anxiety and overreaching. The need to show off one's chops at the expense of real, authentic music seems to have pervaded the universal language of communication. My guest today continues to play music that doesn't allow for attention deficit disorder. He grooves you with sticky stuff that if you don't get the first time, he'll do it again and again and again. It's not how many notes you play, but rather sequencing ideas that are understandable to audiences who dig improvisational music. My guest pours mathematics and love into his music, being able to leave his physical body when creating. Growing up, music was a communal event, a gathering of the vibes that meant more than pacification or having some manufactured beats forced into your ears. He is undeterred by distractions, of which there are many, by practicing his instrument and connecting with audiences in the most soulful way. He's coming back to the great state of Arizona to perform in Scottsdale. Booker T. Jones, great to have you back on the Jake Feinberg Show.
Oh, thank you, Jake. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You know, I listened back to our first interview. I would love you to talk about some of the sanctified churches that you might have attended. If the pastors themselves actually played guitars. I'm very fascinated with some of these sanctified churches that really brought the blues into the music, and whether you had a chance in Mississippi or even Memphis to go to these places.
Well, the denominations, Jake, back then in Memphis and in the South, my family came from Hollis Springs, Mississippi. The denominations were very much segregated. I actually never set foot inside a Pentecostal church. I would stand outside and listen to the music because I was born and raised a Methodist. Methodists were more conservative music. There was classical music at the beginning, and the more gospel music didn't happen until later in the ceremony. So, you just didn't switch denominations back then. It just wasn't done.
Right.
It just wasn't done. So, but my grammar school was across the street from a Pentecostal church. And, of course, there were Pentecostal churches down on Beale Street that I could listen to. My mom and Dad didn't actually voice an opinion about those churches to me. They were very much involved in their own music. My mom played Chopin, Debussy, she played gospel music at home, and my dad sang. And those are the way that services started as a
Can you talk about the effect that it had on you as a young boy, though, to see something, to see kind of, I don't know what the right word is, just pastors that were unafraid and doing things that were non-traditional and not really conservative? How did it affect you as a musician?
Well, for me, as a boy, it actually added balance to my life because I love so many different types of music, and I had access to the blues on the radio, the blues on Beale Street, classical at home, gospel around the neighborhood, and of course jazz. Once I got to about 8 or 9, and I was able to go to Satellite Records and listen to jazz there, and in the clubs. So it actually created balance for me. Now that I look back, and that was good for me because there were a lot of different. I really loved your introduction to this interview, where you mentioned. Not trying to impress audiences with technique and that type of thing, and actually trying to communicate with music. And so I think having that type of upbringing and listening to a lot of different viewpoints on music helps to create balance for me.
Yeah, it's beautifully said because I bring it up because I've been my dad had Universal Language in his collection, which is a interesting album to say the least. And when I listen to it, it's so awesome, Booker, because you play. Some people would say it's too I think in today's world, with music, bass players or whatever, they have to play all these notes and everything's got to be flying around, and it almost like because we're so afraid we're going to lose people's interest or attention spans, or somehow that anxiety has gotten in the way. And when you listen to some of the most of the tracks, Last Tango in Memphis and Reincarnation, all these awesome tunes, you're just grooving 8 minutes and you're only playing, it's not that complex, and it grooves so hard. And that's what I meant with Jimmy Smith too. I mean, guys that used to go see Jimmy Smith, he'd play a lick, and if you didn't get it, he'd play it again, and if you still didn't get it, he'd play it again. And I think you're the same way. I mean, not in an obnoxious way, but just to say, can you marinate on this without getting bored? I'd love you to talk. I just think it's so important to talk to younger cats about not, overcomplicating the music will hurt it.
Well, that's a great compliment. I appreciate it. And Jimmy, of course, as you can tell, was my mentor. And, the name of the album is Universal Language. And, I guess to try to remember that music is a language, and it's not necessarily show business all the time. It's about communicating a thought. And, the thing that makes, a lot of times I think we lose sight of what beauty really consists of. It's not always intricate. Sometimes it's just very simple. And maybe that's the point that we miss, or that musicians miss, or young musicians miss, is that is to dwell and get the beauty and meaning out of simplicity, and understand it and allow it to be, and so then move on to the intricate. I guess it's the philosophy that we're talking about.
When I look at the inner sleeve of Universal Language, there it is, Booker T and the MGs. Your name is Booker T, and the MGs, but yet the biggest face is Steve Cropper's face, and then it's Booker T's. Why is that? Not to take anything away from the musical chops of Cropper, but if Booker T is the lead, why isn't your face the biggest? You know what I'm trying to say? I mean, that didn't make any sense to me.
I do understand very much what you're trying to say, and you just hit on the essence of and the history of the Satellite and Stax Records. You just hit on the I'll call it an Achilles heel. You hit it just now.
What I was unaware of is that in your most recent album that you did, you worked with Bill Withers' daughter, I believe.
Yeah, Corey.
Corey, But I guess I wasn't even aware that you produced Bill's "Ain't No Sunshine Grandma's Hands" on those early Bill Withers records, and I wanted to know about that because I thought that was on the Sussex. I'm just trying to figure out where you were. Yeah. You were out in L.A. Can you paint the picture for me? Because Bill, go ahead.
I had just left Stax. It was late 60s, and I had just left Stax, and the fellow that sold Stax he sold Stax to Gulf and Western Industries, was trying to start a label of his own. His name was Clarence Avath, and he had discovered this singer building airplane toilets in Inglewood, and he was, of course, looking for a producer, so he called me and wanted me to listen to the guy. The guy had a ranch out in Malibu, and the guy came out with his overalls and rug hands and a big notebook full of songs, and it was Bill Withers. Like, Ain't No Sunshine for Me. Sang Ain't No Sunshine for Me in my living room. But I had just moved to California, so I did call, that's when I called Al Jackson to come out to California, and they came out, and I got Nick Stevens Stills to help me. And we went right in and started recording.
Wow, how did you just hit the ground running when you came out to L.A.? I mean, no time flat. You're hooked up with Bill Withers. That's incredible. How you reacted, well, being with Otis Redding, and when you found out that he died, how did that impact you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, looking back, I think I'm a little more objective about it all. Otis was obviously a catalyst for me musically. When he came in with his ideas, him and Al Jackson and the way they wanted to do songs, they were, he in particular was the kind of person that inspired me to get musical ideas and arrangement ideas and, just being generally creative. And so we became friends over that, that was nice. Just quiet friends, not a lot of discussion about what was going on. So those times were nice in the studio, the way we played the songs and enjoyed all that. And then, of course, the death, was probably the first of my realizations that life can just, blindside you.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I didn't realize that could happen, but it did, and so it's just a lesson in a way to just how to go on, how to continue, because you assume that this relationship is going to go on for years.
That's right. I know. I mean, I feel you in my own life, man. It's just like these. I don't know if it's blindsiding or unexpected, and then you just have you have to figure out to dust yourself off. How did he inspire you in your what were some of the things that inspired you about him? What made him a great leader?
Just the enthusiasm and you understood that he was sort of unwilling to accept any less than the best it could be. Just that essence just came through. This is going to be as good as it can be. And the togetherness. That's what a leader does.
That's what a leader does.
He puts himself on the same level as everybody else.
What other projects do you have going on right now, creatively, that you're working on?
Yeah, I am. Of course, I just finished the Sound the Alarm album, and right now I'm trying to conceive of my next project, the next musical project, and figure out exactly what I'm going to be doing in the industry at this point. And of course, I'm working on a book about my life and my musical endeavors. I'm pretty busy.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is fantastic. I mean, if these interviews, I can absolutely send them along, and hopefully, you can bring some memories back for you.
Oh yeah.
I have to ask you. I know these cats. I looked it up this morning. I know they were about 8 years older than you, but I'm going to list off a couple cats and see if you ever linked up with them. Charles Lloyd, George Coleman, Harold Mayburn. Those guys were all from Memphis. And they were born about 9 years before you, but I just was wondering if you would ever, did you ever connect with Charles Lloyd? Memphis was just bubbling at that time.
Okay.
Did you know those cats?
I'll give you a little background. Now, all the guys that I grew up in Memphis were about 4 or 5 years older than me. Al Jackson and Gene Bowlegs, Noah, Willie Mitchell, Tuff Green. They all looked up to Charles Lloyd. And if you go on my Twitter page, you can see a photo of me and Charles at the last couple of weeks ago at the Monterey Jazz Festival.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah. And there's a photo. I posted the photo. I don't post photos very much. But I posted this one because Charles came backstage to say hello. And Charles went through a very difficult time after he left Memphis. And we were both living in Malibu for years. And he avoided me because he was having trouble. And he didn't want me to see him like that. So now he's cool. He's very cool. And so the photo says it all.
And it's on your Twitter page, because I will absolutely boost that thing. What's interesting is a drummer. Well, I was going to ask you about Jim Keltner, but Keltner used to sit in the front row of these dive bars when Lloyd was out there with Bobby Hutcherson, and Lloyd dubbed him and this guy Jack Folks the modern jazz proteges. And do you guys think? I would just love for you guys to. I love all those Memphis cats. I mean, Mayburn, Coleman, those guys. Booker, you guys can burn, man. I just would. You think maybe the next musical venture should be you and Charles Lloyd doing an album.
I saw Harold backstage, and it was great to see both of them. And Charles, we exchanged phone numbers because it had been so long. And you have something there, Jake. You really do. You really do. And speaking of Jim Keltner, he's another old friend of mine that we made a lot of music together. We played on a lot of different types of music together with Neil Young and just a lot of different stuff. He's a good friend.